The last 60 miles were the hardest. The steady rhythm of the highway had given way to the winding coastal roads of Maine, narrow arteries that twisted through dense forests of pine and granite. Marcus Reed kept both hands firmly on the worn leather of the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. Beside him on the passenger seat, Shadow sat as still as a statue, a sentinel carved from smoke and silver. The only movement was the slight twitch of his ears, swiveling to catch the unfamiliar sounds of the deep woods. Marcus glanced at his companion. Shadow was a 6-year-old German shepherd, but his coat was a rarity, a cascade of sable gray and pale white that gave him an ethereal, wolf-like appearance. His amber eyes, usually soft and intelligent, were now keenly alert. He was a calm and steady soul, a mirror to the man Marcus strove to be. But the dog felt the tension humming beneath his owner's skin. Shadow had been with him since the last tour in Afghanistan, a four-legged anchor in the turbulent sea of his return to civilian life. That life was now packed into the bed of his aging Ford pickup truck, covered by a tarp that flapped noisily in the coastal wind. Every box, every tool, every memory. He had sold the house, a cramped suburban box with a small yard that had started to feel more like a cage than a home. The noise of the city, the friendly but hollow greetings from neighbors, the sudden slam of a car door that could send his heart into a frantic hammering rhythm. It had all become too much. He had sold it all for a promise, a whisper of peace carried on the salt spray of the Atlantic. Marcus was a man in his late 40s, tall and lean, with a strength that was more wiry than bulky. His brown hair, cut short in the way he'd kept it for 20 years, was threaded with silver at the temples. His face was a map of his life, rugged and etched with lines of worry, but his blue eyes held a deep, quiet kindness that hadn't been extinguished by what he had seen. He was a former signals intelligence specialist for the Marine Corps, a man trained to find patterns in chaos, to listen to the silence between the words. Now, all he wanted was the silence itself. The small town of Stormhaven appeared suddenly, a collection of weathered buildings huddled around a harbor filled with lobster boats. He pulled up to the small real estate office, the paint peeling from its sign. Harold Fisher, a man whose tired suit seemed to have absorbed the salty air of the coast, handed him a heavy brass key without much ceremony. "She's all yours, Mr. Reed. Been empty a long time. Hope you know what you're getting into, son." Marcus just nodded, the weight of the key in his palm feeling more significant than any legal document. He drove through the small town and onto the spit of land that led to his new property. The road narrowed, the asphalt crumbling at the edges. And then he saw it. The lighthouse stood on the farthest point of the cliff, a lonely pillar of weathered gray stone against the bruised purple of the evening sky. It wasn't grand or picturesque like the ones on postcards. It was stark, scarred by a century of storms, its lamp dark and hollow. The land around it was not large, just a windswept acre of tough grass and jagged rock that plunged into the churning sea below. It was both majestic and desolate, a monument to endurance. He cut the engine. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind whipping past the truck and the distant roar of the waves. He felt a profound sense of coming home, a feeling that had eluded him for years. This place didn't offer comfort. It offered solitude. It didn't promise happiness. It promised a quiet battle he could understand. A battle against the elements, against decay, against time. "Well, Shadow, what do you think?" The dog whined a low note of uncertainty and nudged his hand with a cold nose. The first night was a campaign of essentials. Marcus unloaded a mattress, a cooler with food, a gas stove, and a lantern. The air inside the keeper's cottage at the base of the lighthouse was thick with the smell of dust, salt, and disuse. But as he lit the lantern, casting a warm golden glow across the bare wooden floors, a sense of calm settled over him. He sat on the mattress, eating a cold sandwich, and watched the last light fade from the sky through a grimy window. The rhythmic crash of the waves on the rocks below was a powerful cleansing sound. It was a sound big enough to drown out the noise in his head. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt a flicker of peace. But Shadow did not share his relief. While Marcus felt the tension bleed out of his shoulders, the dog seemed to absorb it. Shadow refused to lie down on the blanket Marcus had spread for him. He paced the small room, his claws clicking softly on the floorboards. He would stop at the door, sniffing at the crack at the bottom, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Then he would move to the window, staring out into the impenetrable darkness, his body coiled and alert. Easy, boy. It's just us here. Just the wind. Shadow came to him, allowing his head to be stroked, but his body remained stiff. He licked Marcus's hand once, then immediately resumed his patrol. His ears were constantly swiveling, tracking sounds Marcus couldn't hear, or perhaps sounds that weren't there at all. He wasn't just exploring a new space. He was on guard. He was sensing something that the vast, peaceful roar of the ocean was hiding from the man. As Marcus lay back on the mattress, the sound of the sea his lullaby, he couldn't shake the image of his loyal friend, a silver phantom pacing in the lantern light, vigilant against a threat only he could perceive. The peace he had felt just moments before was now tinged with a familiar, cold unease. Dawn broke over the Atlantic, painting the churning gray water with strokes of pale pink and orange. Marcus was already awake. He had slept in fits, the unfamiliar sounds of the old house and Shadow's lingering restlessness keeping him on the edge of awareness. Now, with the first light came a sense of purpose. Work was a language he understood. It was a structured, logical process with a tangible result. It was therapy. He began with the keeper's cottage, attacking the years of neglect with the discipline of a soldier preparing his barracks for inspection. He swept away thick blankets of dust that rose like ghosts in the morning light, scrubbed grime from the windows until the ocean view was startlingly clear, and checked every floorboard and wall for signs of rot or water damage. Shadow stayed close, his earlier anxiety replaced by a quiet attentiveness. The dog seemed to understand that this physical reclamation of space was important to the man's state of mind. For Marcus, every sweep of the broom, every repaired hinge, was an act of pushing back the chaos that threatened to live inside his head. By afternoon, the small cottage was clean, organized, and habitable. His gaze turned to the tower. It stood silent and imposing, a vertical challenge. Taking a deep breath of the cold, salty air, he picked up his tools and a bucket and began the ascent. The spiral staircase was a narrow stone helix that echoed with his every footstep. Light filtered in through small, slit-like windows, illuminating dancing dust motes in the air. He worked his way up, floor by floor, each level a small circular room filled with decaying remnants of a forgotten life. Finally, he reached the top. He pushed open a heavy wooden door and stepped into the lantern room. It was a cage of glass and iron, a space that felt suspended between the earth and the sky. The panoramic view was breathtaking, a 360-degree vista of the endless ocean, the jagged coastline, and the distant, toy-like town of Stormhaven. The great frontal lens, the heart of the lighthouse, sat dormant in the center of the room, its hundreds of prisms coated in a thick film of dust and salt. This room had been a beacon of hope for sailors lost in the dark. For Marcus, it felt like the quietest place on earth. He set to work, his movements methodical as he carefully wiped down the glass panels. Shadow began to explore. The dog circled the room, sniffing every corner. Then he stopped. He stood over a particular section of the dark wooden floor near the base of the lens mechanism. A low whine escaped his throat. He pawed at the boards once, then looked at Marcus. "Just an old mouse nest, boy. We'll clear it all out." He continued his work, but Shadow did not move. The whining grew more insistent, and the sound of his claws scraping against the wood became more frantic. "Shadow, leave it." The dog stopped, but only for a moment. He let out a single sharp bark and resumed his digging, looking over his shoulder at Marcus with an expression of such intense, pleading earnestness that it stopped the man in his tracks. Marcus knew his dog. This was not playful curiosity. This was an urgent, undeniable message. He put down his cloth and walked over, kneeling beside his companion. He ran his hand over the floorboards. They seemed solid, no different from the others. "What is it?" Shadow whined again and nudged Marcus's hand with his wet nose, pushing it firmly against one specific plank. Marcus pressed down. The board gave just a fraction of an inch with a faint groan. His heart began to beat a little faster. He went back for his pry bar, slipping the flat edge into the seam. He applied gentle pressure. The old wood resisted, then surrendered with a long, splintering creak. He lifted the plank free. Beneath it was not the dusty subfloor he expected, but a neatly carved shallow compartment. Lying inside was a rectangular object wrapped carefully in dark oiled canvas. With a sense of reverence, he lifted the package out. It was heavier than it looked. He set it down and slowly unwrapped the stiff, waterproof cloth. The smell of old leather and aged paper filled the air. Inside were two items. The first was a journal, its dark leather cover worn smooth by time and handling. There was no title, only a simple compass rose embossed in faded gold. The second was a marine compass, but unlike any he had ever seen. It was heavy, made of solid brass, and its glass was thick and beveled. But when he held it level, the needle didn't swing toward magnetic north. It spun lazily once, then settled, pointing steadfastly toward a specific direction out over the sea, unwavering and certain. He sat on the floor of the lantern room, the setting sun casting long shadows around him. Shadow lay beside him, head on his paws, a quiet observer now that his job was done. Marcus opened the journal. The pages were filled with a meticulous, elegant script, but it was not simple prose. He saw complex astronomical drawings, hand-drawn nautical charts of the local coastline, and lines of what looked like cryptic code. He saw notations about tides, star alignments, and historical shipwrecks. It was the work of a brilliant, obsessive mind. He read the first entry, dated decades ago. The sea does not give up its dead, but it sometimes whispers its secrets to those who know how to listen. As the last light of day bled from the sky, Marcus Reed realized he had not just purchased a dilapidated house on a cliff. He had inherited a mystery. His quiet war for peace was over. A new, far more complex campaign had just begun. Miles away from the salt-sprayed cliffs of Stormhaven, the world was one of polished steel, dark wood, and hushed climate-controlled air. Cameron Blackwood stood before a floor-to-ceiling window in his penthouse office, looking down at the city of Boston below. He was a man in his late 50s, though he looked a decade younger. His silver hair perfectly styled, his tailored Italian suit fitting his frame without a single crease. His face was handsome, a mask of smooth, confident charm, but his pale blue eyes held the cold, calculating stillness of a frozen lake. On his expansive desk, among the neat stacks of contracts and architectural models, lay a single yellowed nautical chart of the Maine coastline. There was a particular spot marked with a faded X, Stormwatch Point, the site of the lighthouse Marcus Reed now called home. The private line on his desk buzzed softly. He pressed the speaker button. Yes? Mr. Blackwood, the deed was filed this morning, the Stormwatch Point property. It's been sold. A muscle tightened in Blackwood's jaw. He had owned this entire coastline figuratively for years. Every zoning official, every council member was in his pocket. But the lighthouse property had remained stubbornly out of reach, protected by the eccentric will of its deceased owner. He had sent his own teams to survey the place years ago, crawling over every inch of the tower and the cottage. They had found nothing but dust and decay. Yet Blackwood's gut, the instinct that had built his empire, told him the secret was still there, hidden in plain sight. To whom? An individual. One Marcus Reed. Seems to be a veteran. Paid in cash, no financing. A veteran. A nobody. Perfect. His own brute force methods had failed. The old man had been too clever. But a new owner living in the space breathing its air might just stumble over the tripwire his own men had missed. A new strategy was needed. Patience. He is to be our bloodhound. He turned from the window and pressed another button on his console. Victor, my office. The door opened moments later, and Victor Arice entered. He was the physical antithesis of his boss, a large, heavily built man with a shaved head and a neck as thick as a tree trunk. He moved with a quiet, predatory economy of motion. He wore a simple black jacket and dark pants, functional clothing for a man whose job was to solve problems that couldn't be solved with a pen. Blackwood gestured to the chart on his desk. Our stubborn lighthouse has a new tenant. I want eyes on him. Constant. I want to know when he wakes, when he sleeps, what he eats for breakfast. I want to know if he finds so much as a loose floorboard. Do not engage. Do not be seen. Just watch. Let him be the key. When he unlocks the door, you will take it from him. Victor Reese simply nodded, a flicker of understanding in his dark eyes, and left as silently as he had arrived. Back at the lighthouse, Marcus was lost in another world. The days bled into one another, measured only by the rising and falling of the tides. The journal of Thomas Hammond, the last lighthouse keeper, was his sole obsession. It was a labyrinth of history, astronomy, and personal reflection. Marcus, the former signals intelligence specialist, found a familiar rhythm in the work, teasing patterns from the chaos of Thomas's writing. He cross-referenced star charts with tide tables, trying to understand the cryptic diagrams that filled the margins. He was so consumed that at first, he didn't notice the subtle changes in his environment. While repairing a shutter on the cottage's exterior, a flash of light from the high cliff road across the cove caught his eye. He squinted, saw nothing but the sun glinting off rock, and thought no more of it. The next day it happened again. This time he was sure it was the reflection from a pair of binoculars. He started paying more attention. A black SUV was often parked at the scenic overlook miles down the coast. It was too far away to be threatening, but its presence was constant. A dark, unblinking eye. One morning after a night of heavy rain, he found a set of footprints in the soft mud at the edge of the woods bordering his property. They were deep and wide, made by heavy work boots. They were not his. He tried to dismiss it all. He was isolated. His mind, scarred by years of learned hypervigilance, was prone to seeing threats where none existed. This was exactly the kind of paranoia he had come here to escape. But he couldn't explain Shadow. The dog's behavior had transformed. The quiet companion who was content to lie at his feet was gone. Shadow had become a sentry. He spent hours at the edge of the cliff, not looking at the waves, but staring intently at the distant overlook where the SUV so often sat. His body would be tense, the fur along his spine slightly raised. When Marcus walked the property line, Shadow would walk with him, not with the easy gait of a pet, but with the focused patrol of a guard. He would stop near the spot where Marcus had found the footprints, lower his head, and a low, guttural growl would vibrate in his chest. He would stand there for minutes at a time, a silent silver-gray statue of warning, his gaze fixed on the tree line. One evening, as Marcus sat on his porch reading the journal, Shadow suddenly rose from his resting spot, walked to the edge of the yard, and let out a series of deep, resonant barks aimed at the empty darkness. The sound was not one of excitement. It was a clear territorial challenge. Marcus put the book down. He walked over and stood beside his dog, placing a hand on his strong back. Shadow fell silent, but he didn't relax. He pressed against Marcus's leg, a solid, reassuring weight. Marcus looked out into the vast empty night. He could see nothing. He could hear nothing but the wind and the sea. But he trusted the senses of the animal beside him more than he trusted his own desire for peace. The paranoia wasn't in his head. The threat was real. He was being watched. The uneasy truce with the watching darkness lasted 2 days. 2 days of Marcus working with a constant, prickling awareness at the back of his neck, and Shadow maintaining a silent, vigilant perimeter. The need for supplies, however, could not be ignored. He needed lumber to repair the cottage roof, sealant for the windows, and food for himself and the dog. The trip to Stormhaven was no longer a simple chore. It was a tactical movement into potentially hostile territory. He left Shadow in the cab of the truck, the window cracked just enough for the mite to breathe the salt air. "Watch our six, buddy." Shadow just whined, his amber eyes fixed on Marcus, a silent promise to guard their temporary command post. Marcus moved through the town with a purpose that drew quiet attention. He was the stranger, the newcomer who had bought the Stormwatch Point Lighthouse, a landmark of local curiosity. In the hardware store, he felt the curious glances of the other patrons. He bought his supplies, paid in coin, and loaded them into his truck. But his mission wasn't complete. He needed information, and the best place to find the pulse of a small town was at its heart. The diner was called the Harbor Light. It was a cozy place smelling of fresh coffee, fried bacon, and the faint, briny scent of the harbor. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, and old framed photographs of fishing boats in Stormhaven in years past hung crookedly. Marcus chose a booth by the window, a strategic position that gave him a clear view of the street in the entrance. A woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was in her late 50s, with a cloud of white hair pulled back from a kind, weathered face. Her eyes, the color of a summer sky, were crinkled at the corners from a lifetime of smiling, and they held a sharp, intelligent light. She moved with an easy, no-nonsense grace, carrying a coffee pot as if it were an extension of her arm. "Coffee, hun? Please," she filled his mug. "Haven't seen you in here before. You must be the one who bought old Thomas's place." Marcus looked up, surprised by her directness. "Marcus Reed. And yes, that's me. Diana Collins. Pleased to meet you. Takes a certain kind of person to want that lighthouse. The quiet is what I came for." Diana studied him for a long moment, her gaze perceptive. "Thomas was a friend of mine. A bit of an odd duck, but a good man. The best. He loved that lighthouse more than anything. Talked to it like it was a person." This was the opening Marcus had been hoping for. "I found some of his old things. A journal. Seems like he was quite a historian." Diana's smile was fond. Historian is one word for it. He was obsessed. Chasing ghosts, most people said. Specifically the ghost of a ship called the Horizon, wrecked in a hurricane in June 1765. Thomas was convinced it went down right off your point, carrying something valuable. Marcus felt a jolt of recognition. The name was scrawled all over the journal. Did he ever find anything? Diana shook her head, tipping off his coffee. "Not that he ever told me. But he was always searching, always convinced he was on the verge of a breakthrough. Said he had to protect its legacy from the sharks." The word hung in the air between them. Sharks? The warmth in Diana's expression cooled slightly, replaced by a look of stern caution. She leaned a little closer, lowering her voice. "You seem like a good man, Mr. Reed, so I'll give you some free advice. There are sharks on the land, too. For years, a man named Cameron Blackwood has been trying to get his hands on that property. He's a big-time developer from Boston. Thinks he can buy the whole coastline." Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He made Thomas's last years miserable. Lowball offers, then threats disguised as legal notices. He's pressured other folks around here too. Tries to scare them into selling cheap. A real shark in a suit, that one. If he finds out you're living there, he'll come sniffing around. Be careful of him. It was happening. In his mind, the pieces slammed into place with the force of a rifle bolt locking into battery. The glint of binoculars from the cliff, the black SUV at the overlook, the footprints in the mud. It wasn't random, it wasn't his paranoia, it was a calculated campaign of surveillance. And the man behind it, the invisible, watching shadow, now had a name. Cameron Blackwood. Marcus looked out the window at the quiet street. It didn't look so quiet anymore. It looked like the edge of a battlefield. The enemy he had been sensing now had a face, a name, and a clear motive. He finished his coffee, the warmth doing nothing to chase away the chill that had settled deep in his bones. He paid his bill, leaving a generous tip. "Thank you, Diana. That's the most valuable thing I've gotten all week." There was a look of understanding in her eyes. She simply nodded. "You take care of yourself out there. And that beautiful dog of yours. Thomas would have liked that you have a dog." Marcus walked back to his truck, the weight of his purchases seeming insignificant compared to the weight of the new reality. He opened the door and was met by Shadow's anxious, questioning gaze. He rested his hand on the dog's head, the thick fur a familiar comfort. "Well, boy, we know his name." The knowledge of a named enemy changed everything. The quiet, therapeutic rhythm of Marcus's days vanished, replaced by the taut, focused urgency of a mission. Sleep became a necessary inconvenience, food a fuel. He worked day and night, the lantern in the keeper's cottage burning into the small hours of the morning. He now understood he was in a race, and his opponent, Cameron Blackwood, had a significant head start. He pored over Thomas Hammond's journal again and again, but the text offered no more direct clues. The secrets, Marcus became convinced, were not just on paper. They were embedded in the lighthouse itself, hidden with a patience and ingenuity that a corporate goon squad would never possess. Blackwood's men had likely searched this place with impatience, looking for a chest or a safe, something obvious. Thomas Hammond was not an obvious man. He was a man who thought in layers, in puzzles. Marcus's attention turned completely to the heart of the tower, the massive, beautiful, and silent clockwork mechanism designed to turn the great lens. It was a masterpiece of Victorian engineering, a complex ballet of brass gears, heavy counterweights, and polished steel drive shafts. It was the one thing in the lighthouse that was both incredibly complex and absolutely essential to its function. It was the perfect hiding place. He decided the first step was to see if he could make it work. For 2 days, he meticulously cleaned and oiled every component, his movements precise and economical. He was no longer just a handyman, he was a specialist, his old signals intelligence training resurfacing as he analyzed the intricate system, understanding how each piece connected to the whole. Finally, the moment came. He released the brake on the primary counterweight. With a deep, resonant groan, the machine came to life. The great gears began to turn, their brass teeth meshing with a series of satisfying clicks and whirs. The sound was immense, filling the lantern room with the powerful rhythmic heartbeat of a bygone era. Shadow, who had been lying calmly in a patch of sunlight, shot to his feet. As the mechanism's speed increased, a high-pitched screech began to emanate from a large gear cluster near the base. The smell of old, heated oil and grinding metal filled the air. The dog began to pant, his body trembling. He whined a high, anxious sound that was almost lost in the mechanical symphony. "It's all right, boy, just old." But Shadow was not just nervous, he was focused. He approached the groaning machine, his ears flat against his head. He ignored the larger, louder gears and went directly to the source of the screeching. He nudged Marcus's leg with his nose, then nudged the heavy iron housing that covered the gear cluster. He looked up at Marcus, his amber eyes wide with distress. This wasn't a general fear of the noise. It was a specific, targeted complaint. Trusting his partner implicitly, Marcus re-engaged the brake. The mechanism wound down with a final shuddering sigh. Silence returned, broken only by the wind and Shadow's soft whining. Marcus knelt, running his hand along the dog's back to soothe him. "Show me." Shadow nudged the iron housing again. Marcus unlatched the heavy cover and swung it open, revealing a complex web of interlocking gears. He examined them one by one. They were all covered in the same patina of age, the same film of old grease. Nothing seemed out of place. He was about to close the cover when he remembered his training. Never look for what is there. Look for what isn't. Look for the anomaly. He ran his fingers over the teeth of each gear, feeling the worn metal. Then, on the largest brass cog in the cluster, his thumb snagged on something. He leaned closer, his eyes inches from the surface. There, along the seam where the gear's face was joined to its hub, were a series of incredibly faint scratches, almost invisible against the aged brass. They were tool marks, but not from any standard wrench. They were the subtle signature of a custom tool made for a secret purpose. Blackwood's men, looking for a handle or a hinge, would never have seen it. His breath caught. He spent the next hour carefully studying the gear, discovering a tiny, almost seamless pressure release pin hidden in one of the spokes. When he finally pressed it with the tip of a screwdriver, there was a soft click. The face of the gear loosened. It wasn't a solid piece of brass, it was a cap. With trembling hands, he worked the cap free. Inside, just as he had suspected, the gear had been hollowed out. Nestled in the void was a small, cylindrical object, wrapped in oilskin and tied with twine. He gently lifted it out. The package was light, almost weightless. He unwrapped it carefully, the oilskin crinkling in the quiet room. Inside was a single, tightly rolled piece of parchment. It was not a letter or a map of the land. As he unrolled it, he saw the familiar, meticulous hand of Thomas Hammond. It was a star chart, but unique and strange, filled with constellations he did not recognize and trajectories that seemed to defy known celestial mechanics. He looked from the intricate drawing to Shadow, who was now sitting calmly beside him, his tongue lolling in a silent, happy pant. The dog's job was done. Marcus reached out and wrapped his arm around the Walkie's powerful neck, burying his face in the thick, gray fur. "Good boy. You found it." They had the next piece of the puzzle. It was a piece Blackwood did not have, a secret the brute force of his greed could never uncover. It was a secret whispered by a ghost and found by a dog. The lantern room became Marcus's command center. For days, he lived and breathed the mystery, sleeping on a cot beside the great lens, with Shadow a constant watchful presence. The star chart was spread across the floor, weighted down at its corners with old tools. To an untrained eye, it was a beautiful but nonsensical piece of art. To Marcus, it was a complex cipher, and the kind of challenge his mind had been trained to dismantle. He applied the skills he had learned in the quiet, tense rooms of signals intelligence. He looked for patterns, for repetitions, for anomalies. He quickly confirmed his initial theory. This was no map of the heavens. The constellations were subtly wrong, the distances between the stars mathematically impossible. It was a map of the seabed, a brilliant piece of coded cartography. The stars were underwater pinnacles, the nebulae were treacherous reefs, and the graceful arcs of comets were the paths of deep-sea currents. Thomas Hammond had painted a portrait of the ocean floor and disguised it as the night sky, but the map alone was a lock without a key. Frustrated, Marcus turned back to the other artifacts. He picked up the heavy brass compass again, turning it over in his hands. It felt too complex for a simple directional tool. He found a small, almost invisible seam, and using the tip of his knife, managed to pry the bottom plate off. Inside, nestled in a velvet lining, was a small, precisely ground lens. His mind raced back to a passage in the journal he had dismissed as poetic flourish. On the darkest night, the light itself will reveal the truth. He looked at the great lamp of the lighthouse, then at the lens in his hand, then at the chart on the floor. The pieces fell into place with a sudden, stunning clarity. The journal also spoke repeatedly of the summer solstice, the longest night of the year. It was all there. The lighthouse was the projector, the lens was the focus, the chart was the screen, and the winter solstice was the date when the celestial alignment, and perhaps the angle of the moon, would make the projection perfect. He now knew how to find the horizon. He just had to wait for the right night. Patience was a virtue Marcus Reed had in abundance. Cameron Blackwood did not. In his gleaming office, Blackwood listened to the tinny voice of Victor Reese on the speakerphone. "Nothing," Victor reported, his voice gravelly with frustration. "He cleans, he fixes things, he takes the dog for walks. He spends hours up in the lantern room, but from my position, I can't see what he's doing. If he's found something, he's not acting like it." Blackwood drummed his fingers on his polished desk. His bloodhound was proving to be frustratingly slow. The time for passive observation was over. It was time to rattle the cage. "The time for watching is over, Victor. Go in. I don't care how you do it. Find out what he knows. Find out what he has found. Tonight." That evening, a fragile peace had settled over the lighthouse. Marcus was downstairs in the small kitchen, heating a can of soup on the gas stove. He was tired, but filled with a quiet sense of triumph. He had solved Thomas's puzzle. Shadow was lying on the rug near the door, seemingly asleep. The only sounds were the gentle hiss of the stove and the distant murmur of the tide. Then Shadow moved. It was not a gradual awakening. One moment he was sleeping, the next he was on his feet, silent and rigid. A low growl like the sound of distant thunder vibrated from deep in his chest. His head was lowered, his eyes fixed on the cottage door. The fur on his back stood on end. Marcus instantly abandoned the stove, his body moving without conscious thought. He grabbed the heaviest tool he had nearby, a solid iron tire iron. He didn't make a sound, simply moved into the shadows of the room, his back against the wall, his gaze locked on the door. He trusted Shadow's warning as much as he would trust a report from his most reliable field operative. The old doorknob began to turn slowly, silently, then with a sudden, violent crack, the wooden door frame splintered and the door flew open. Victor Reese filled the doorway, a crowbar in one hand, his large frame silhouetted against the night. But the surprise was his. He expected a startled, confused man. He did not expect the room to be dark. Nor did he expect the immediate, explosive reaction. Before Victor could take a second step, a gray and white blur of fury shot out of the darkness. Shadow launched himself, not at Victor's legs, but at the arm holding the crowbar, his powerful jaws clamping down. Victor roared in pain and surprise, stumbling back, shaking his arm violently to dislodge the dog. That was the opening Marcus needed. He moved from the shadows, his attack swift and precise. He brought the tire iron down in a hard, disabling strike against Victor's wrist. There was a sickening crack of bone, and the crowbar clattered to the floor. Victor bellowed again, this time a scream of pure agony, clutching his shattered wrist. The fight was over before it had truly begun. It was a brief, brutal collision of violence in the small, quiet room. Victor, a bully used to intimidating his victims, was utterly unprepared for the coordinated, ferocious defense of a trained soldier and his fiercely loyal canine partner. He stared at Marcus with eyes wide with shock and pain, then at the snarling dog still holding its ground. He scrambled backward out the door and disappeared into the night. Marcus slammed the broken door shut and wedged a chair under the knob. His heart was pounding, adrenaline singing in his veins. He knelt and ran a hand over Shadow's head, checking him for injuries. The dog was fine, licking his chops, a low growl still rumbling in his throat. The quiet sanctuary was quiet no longer. Its peace had been irrevocably shattered. Marcus looked at the splintered door frame and then out into the oppressive darkness. The game was no longer about watching. It was about survival. And Victor Reese had left one thing behind besides his crowbar, a clear, unspoken threat. He would be back. The first warning came over the crackling static of the battery-powered weather radio. A nor'easter, the announcer's grave voice had said, a monster of a storm turning up the coast, promising hurricane-force winds in a torrential downpour. Marcus looked out the window. The sky was a bruised, ominous gray, and the sea had transformed from a gentle murmur into a restless, white-capped snarl. He knew what a storm like this meant out here on this exposed finger of rock. Isolation. Complete and total. He spent the rest of the day preparing for the siege. He boarded up the windows of the cottage, hammered loose shingles back into place on the roof, and carried extra firewood inside. He worked with a grim, methodical efficiency, every action deliberate. Shadow stayed at his heels, a silent shadow. His usual calm was replaced by a low-level anxiety that mirrored the dropping barometric pressure. The dog could feel the coming violence in the air. As dusk fell, the storm hit. It came not as rain, but as a solid wall of wind and water that slammed into the lighthouse with the force of a physical blow. The old stone tower groaned under the assault. The wind shrieked through the eaves and tiny cracks in the masonry, a high, keening sound like something in agony. For Marcus, the sounds were horribly familiar. The percussive blast of waves against the cliffside sounded like mortar fire. The high shriek of the wind was the sound of incoming rockets. The battle he had been fighting in the quiet corners of his mind was suddenly all around him, given voice and fury by the storm. He sat in the dim light of the lantern, his fists clenched as memories clawed at the edges of his vision, the grit of desert sand in his teeth, the smell of cordite, the faces of men he had lost. He was back there in the cave, his carefully constructed peace washed away by the deluge. He felt a wet nose press insistently against his hand. He looked down into Shadow's steady amber eyes. The dog whined softly, not in fear of the storm, but in concern for his human. The simple, grounding touch was an anchor. Marcus took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing himself back to the present. He was not in the desert. He was in Maine. He was in his home. And he was not alone. He had a duty. He had to protect his partner. He couldn't fix the splintered door frame tonight, but he could make sure they were secure. He pushed a heavy dresser in front of the door and positioned a chair under the doorknob of the back entrance. Then he went to work deciphering more of Thomas Hammond's journal. As the night deepened, so did his understanding. He found a passage that changed everything. The truth about the horizon is not what the history books claim. She was not merely a merchant vessel. She carried a secret cargo, one that could have altered the very foundation of our young nation. The ship's captain, Edwards Blackwood, was entrusted with documents of immeasurable historical significance. But fate intervened, and now the sea holds both the truth and its bearer. Edwards Blackwood. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Could it be a coincidence, or was Cameron Blackwood somehow connected to the ship's captain? If so, this wasn't just about real estate development. This was about something far more personal, far more profound. The storm raged for 3 days. 3 days of howling wind, of rain that seemed to defy gravity by striking horizontally against the lighthouse. 3 days of Marcus diving deeper into the mystery, connecting pieces of the puzzle while the world outside was engulfed in chaos. When the storm finally broke, it left behind a landscape transformed. Trees had been uprooted along the coast. Debris littered the rocky shore. But the lighthouse stood as it had for over a century, unbowed and unbroken. Marcus knew that Victor Reese would return, and next time he wouldn't come alone. He needed allies. He needed more information. And most of all, he needed to understand exactly what he was protecting. He made the drive back into Stormhaven, the road now littered with fallen branches and washed-out gravel. The small town was in recovery mode, people clearing debris, repairing storm damage, helping neighbors. It was the kind of quiet community resilience that reminded Marcus why he had chosen this place. The harbor light was busy when he entered, a hub of activity where locals gathered to share storm stories and check on one another. Diana Collins was moving between tables with a coffee pot, offering refills and warm words in equal measure. When she saw Marcus, a look of genuine relief crossed her face. "Thank God you're all right. That old lighthouse took a beating, I'm sure." She didn't know the half of it. "We managed, but I need to talk to you about Thomas, about the horizon, and about Cameron Blackwood." Diana's expression turned serious. She nodded toward a booth in the far corner, away from the other patrons. "Give me 5 minutes." True to her word, she joined him shortly, sliding into the seat across from him. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You found something, haven't you?" Marcus nodded, keeping his voice low. "I found Thomas's journal, a strange compass, and a star chart. And I think I've figured out what they mean, but there's more to this than just a shipwreck. One of Blackwood's men broke into the lighthouse 3 nights ago." Diana's face paled. "Are you hurt?" "We're fine. Shadow and I convinced him it was a bad idea, but he'll be back with reinforcements." "I need to know everything you know about Thomas, about the horizon, and especially about Cameron Blackwood's connection to all this." Diana took a deep breath, her eyes darting to the diner's windows as if checking for unwelcome observers. "It's a long story, and not one for public consumption. Meet me at the town library in an hour. There's someone you should meet." The Stormhaven Public Library was a small, 2-story brick building tucked away on a quiet side street. It had the slightly musty, comforting smell of old books and wood polish. Diana was waiting for him in a private study room at the back, along with an elderly man Marcus had never seen before. He was in his mid-70s, with a shock of white hair and wire-rimmed glasses perched on a hawkish nose. Despite his age, he sat ramrod straight, with the unmistakable bearing of a military man. "This is Dr. Robert Winters. He was Thomas's closest friend and colleague. He's a maritime historian." The old man extended a hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Mr. Reed, Diana tells me you've inherited more than just a lighthouse." Marcus sized up the man quickly. He sensed no deception, only a keen intelligence and perhaps a touch of wariness. "I found Thomas Hammond's journal and some other items. I think they point to the location of a shipwreck, the horizon." Dr. Winters nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "And now Cameron Blackwood is breathing down your neck, just as he did with Thomas. Some things never change." The old historian motioned for Marcus to sit. "What do you know about the American Revolution, Mr. Reed, beyond what they taught you in school?" Marcus shrugged. "The basics: colonial rebellion against British rule, taxation without representation, the Declaration of Independence, the usual." "What if I told you there was another document, one that was supposed to arrive in the colonies just before the Declaration was signed? A document so controversial, so potentially explosive, that it was kept secret even from most of the Continental Congress?" Marcus leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What kind of document?" Dr. Winters removed his glasses, polishing them methodically with a handkerchief. "It was a secret treaty, an offer from a faction within the British Parliament to grant the colonies significant autonomy, far more than they were publicly demanding, in exchange for remaining part of the British Empire. It would have transformed the rebellion into a negotiation. It might have prevented the war entirely. The American Revolution might never have happened," Diana added softly. Marcus tried to process this, but the document never arrived. Dr. Winters nodded. "It was entrusted to Captain Edwards Blackwood of the merchant ship Horizon. He was to deliver it directly to John Adams, but the ship never made it. A hurricane drove it against the rocks off the Maine coast in June of 1765. The treaty was lost, along with all hands. And Captain Blackwood was an ancestor of Cameron Blackwood," Marcus concluded, the pieces falling into place. "His direct ancestor," Dr. Winters confirmed. "And here's where history gets interesting. After the wreck, rumors began to circulate that Captain Blackwood had deliberately sabotaged his own mission, that he was a British loyalist who disagreed with the treaty's concessions and chose to prevent its delivery. His family name was disgraced. They went from respected shipping magnates to pariahs almost overnight. Diana picked up the thread. Cameron Blackwood is obsessed with clearing his family name. He believes if he can find the wreck of the Horizon and the treaty, he can prove his ancestor wasn't a traitor. He's spent decades searching, using his real estate empire as cover for buying up coastal properties where the ship might have gone down. And Thomas Hammond somehow figured out where it actually was, Marcus said. Dr. Winters nodded. Thomas was brilliant. Eccentric, but brilliant. He spent years analyzing historical weather data, naval charts, and first-hand accounts of the wreck. He created a revolutionary model for calculating how the ship would have been driven by the storm. But he never shared his findings with anyone, not even me. He became paranoid in his final years, convinced that Blackwood would stop at nothing to claim the discovery as his own. Now Marcus understood. This wasn't just about a historical shipwreck. It was about legacy, about honor, about righting a historical wrong. For Blackwood, finding the Horizon meant redemption for his family name. But there was still something that didn't make sense. If Thomas knew where the ship was, why didn't he just find it himself? Why leave all these clues and puzzles? Dr. Winters smiled sadly. 2 reasons. First, the location is in deep water. It would require significant resources to reach it, resources Thomas didn't have. And second, he didn't trust anyone to handle the find properly. The treaty, if it survived, belongs in the Smithsonian or the National Archives, not in private hands. Thomas wanted to ensure that whoever found it would do the right thing. He was testing me, Marcus realized. All these puzzles, they're not just directions to the wreck. They're a test of character. Diana nodded. He wanted someone smart enough to solve his puzzles, but also someone with integrity. Someone who would protect the legacy, not exploit it. Marcus sat back, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This was far bigger than he had imagined. A lost document that could have changed the course of American history. A family's honor hanging in the balance. And now, somehow, it had all landed in his lap. I need to get back to the lighthouse, he said finally. I need to finish what Thomas started. Before you go, Dr. Winters said, reaching into his briefcase, there's something you should see. He pulled out a thick file folder and placed it on the table. This is everything I know about the Horizon and the Blackwood family. Thomas shared some of his research with me over the years, though he kept the final location to himself. This might help you understand what you're dealing with. Marcus took the folder gratefully. Thank you, both of you. Dr. Winters fixed him with a stern gaze. Be careful, Mr. Reed. Cameron Blackwood is not just wealthy and powerful. He's a man on a mission to restore his family's honor. There's nothing more dangerous than someone who believes they're righteous in their cause. As Marcus rose to leave, Diana caught his arm. One more thing, Thomas had a safety deposit box at Storm Haven Savings and Loan. As his closest friend, I was given access after his death. I never opened it, but I think you should. Here's the key. She pressed a small brass key into his palm. It's box number 447. Whatever's inside, I think it's meant for the person who solved his puzzles. The Storm Haven Savings and Loan was a modest brick building on Main Street, its architecture suggesting it had been there since the town's founding. Inside, Marcus presented the key and his identification to a teller who led him to a small room lined with metal boxes. Box 447 was in the corner. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside was a single item, a small leather pouch, worn with age. Marcus tipped it onto the table and a small brass object fell out. It was a key, not a modern key, but an antique one, its shaft intricate and its head ornately designed with what looked like a ship's wheel. Along with it was a small slip of paper with a single line of text in Thomas Hammond's now familiar handwriting. The true legacy of the Horizon lies not in gold, but in truth. Marcus stared at the key, turning it over in his hands. What did it open? A chest on the Horizon itself? Some hidden compartment he had yet to discover in the lighthouse? He carefully returned it to the pouch and tucked it into his pocket. Another piece of the puzzle. As he drove back to the lighthouse, the afternoon sun breaking through the clouds after the storm, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Twice, he noticed a dark sedan in his rearview mirror, keeping pace several cars behind. When he made a sudden turn off the main road, the sedan continued straight, but the damage was done. His paranoia was fully awakened. He arrived back at the lighthouse to find Shadow agitated, pacing by the windows and growling at shadows. The dog's unease only confirmed Marcus's suspicions. They were running out of time. That night, he spread Dr. Winter's files across the kitchen table, absorbing everything he could about the horizon and the Blackwood family. The ship had been a 120-foot merchant vessel, sturdy and well-built. Captain Edwards Blackwood had been 42 years old, a respected seaman with an impeccable record. The mysterious treaty had been entrusted to him by Lord William Barrington, a prominent member of Parliament sympathetic to colonial concerns. Most interestingly, the file contained a detailed genealogy of the Blackwood family. After the disaster, the captain's son, James Blackwood, had moved the family from Boston to Charleston, changing their fortunes through cotton and tobacco. By the Civil War, they were wealthy plantation owners. They backed the Confederacy and lost nearly everything. A generation later, they rebuilt in shipping and railroads. By the 1920s, they had diversified into real estate and banking. Cameron Blackwood was the culmination of 7 generations of rebuilding, of clawing back from disgrace. No wonder he was obsessed. But one detail in particular caught Marcus's eye. A mention that Edwards Blackwood had kept a personal log separate from the ship's official log, a tradition continued by his descendants. If that log had survived the wreck, it might contain the captain's true motivations. It might exonerate him or condemn him permanently. As dawn approached, Marcus finally pieced together what Thomas Hammond had discovered. The star chart wasn't just a map of the seafloor, it was a precise astronomical calculation. The positions of the stars correlated to the positions of the sun, moon, and planets on a specific date, the summer solstice. And if the lens from the compass was held at a certain angle to the light of the lantern, it would project a beam that, when aligned with the chart, would reveal the exact location of the horizon. It was brilliant. Thomas had created a system that could only work in the lighthouse itself and only on a specific day of the year. No wonder Blackwood's men had never found it, and the summer solstice was just 3 days away. Marcus was so absorbed in his work that he almost missed the sound, a faint crunch of gravel outside. Shadow heard it too, his head snapping up, ears forward, a low growl building in his throat. Moving silently, Marcus killed the lights and approached the window. In the pale pre-dawn light, he could make out 3 figures moving stealthily toward the lighthouse. One was the hulking form of Victor Reese, his arm now in a cast. The others were similarly built, professional muscle. This time they weren't coming to investigate. They were coming to take. Marcus's mind raced. He was outnumbered and likely outgunned. He needed to level the playing field. "Shadow, stay," he whispered, placing a firm hand on the dog's back. The command was unnecessary. The dog was already in full guardian mode, his body tense and ready. Marcus moved quickly to the kitchen and grabbed his satellite phone. He dialed Diana's number, speaking in an urgent whisper when she answered. "Blackwood's men are here, 3 of them, armed. Call the sheriff." Her voice was steady, betraying no panic. "I'm on it. Robert is with me. We'll bring help. Just stay alive, Marcus." He ended the call and grabbed the tire iron from beside the door. Not much of a weapon against guns, but better than nothing. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out something he hadn't touched since arriving in Storm Haven, a small tactical flashlight, military grade, capable of emitting a disorienting strobe effect. A parting gift from his time in the Corps. He positioned himself beside the window where he could see without being seen. The 3 men had split up, one heading for the back door, the other 2 approaching the front. They moved with practiced efficiency. These weren't just thugs. They were trained professionals. Victor was giving orders, his voice a harsh whisper carried on the still morning air. "Henderson, take the back. Phillips, with me. Remember, Blackwood wants him alive. The dog is expendable." Marcus felt a cold fury at those words. He looked at Shadow, the loyal companion who had saved his life more than once. No one was going to harm his dog. No one. He heard the back door rattle as Henderson tested it, then the soft scrape of lock-picking tools. At the front, Victor and Phillips were conferring in low voices. Marcus made his decision. He would use their division against them. Divide and conquer. He moved silently to the back door, shadow at his heels. He could see the faint shadow of Henderson through the curtained window. The man was focused on the lock, his back exposed. When the door finally swung open, Marcus was waiting. He hit the button on the tactical flashlight, sending a blinding, disorienting strobe directly into Henderson's face. The man recoiled, raising an arm to shield his eyes. That moment of disorientation was all Marcus needed. He swung the tire iron, connecting with Henderson's wrist. There was a sharp crack as bones broke, and the gun the man had been holding clattered to the floor. Henderson let out a howl of pain, but his cry was cut short as Marcus drove a fist into his solar plexus, doubling him over. A final blow to the base of the skull, and Henderson crumpled to the floor unconscious. One down, two to go. At the front door, Victor and Phillips had heard the commotion. They abandoned subtlety, Victor kicking in the door with a splintering crash. Marcus was already moving, darting across the cottage to a position behind the overturned kitchen table. Shadow was beside him, a low, continuous growl emanating from his throat. The first man through the door was Phillips, gun raised. Marcus triggered the strobe again, flooding the room with disorienting light. Phillips hesitated, momentarily blinded. "Now, Shadow," Marcus commanded. The dog launched himself across the room, a gray blur of teeth and muscle. He hit Phillips mid-chest, sending the man staggering backward. The gun discharged, a deafening report in the confined space, but the bullet went wild, embedding itself in the ceiling. Shadow clamped down on Phillips' gun arm, the man screaming as powerful jaws exerted crushing pressure. The gun fell from nerveless fingers. Victor appeared in the doorway, his own weapon raised. Despite his injured wrist, he was steady, his eyes cold as he aimed at Shadow. "No!" Marcus shouted. He flung the tire iron with all his strength. It spun through the air, striking Victor's shoulder. The shot went wide, shattering a lamp instead of Shadow's skull. Marcus was already moving, closing the distance between them. He tackled Victor, driving him backward onto the porch. They crashed through the railing, falling 6 feet to the hard ground below. The impact drove the breath from Marcus's lungs. But he held on, grappling with the larger man for control of the gun. Victor was strong, his good arm like an iron bar, as he tried to bring the weapon to bear. Marcus could feel his strength beginning to fade. The fall had hurt him more than he'd initially realized. Then a blur of gray fur entered his peripheral vision. Shadow had left Phillips incapacitated inside, and now launched himself at Victor. The man screamed as Shadow's teeth sank into his shoulder. The distraction was all Marcus needed. He wrenched the gun free and scrambled backward, training it on Victor. "Don't move," he gasped, trying to catch his breath. "Shadow, back." The dog released his hold and retreated to Marcus's side, still growling, his muzzle stained red. Victor lay on the ground, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face a mask of pain and hatred. "You're dead, Reed. You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I know about Edward's Blackwood. I know about the treaty, and I know where the horizon is." Victor's eyes widened slightly, a tell that Marcus hadn't been expecting. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Tell your boss if he wants to know the truth about his ancestor, he'll have to deal with me directly. No more hired muscle, no more threats, just him and me." Before Victor could respond, the distant wail of police sirens cut through the morning air. Help was coming. Victor's face twisted with rage and frustration. "This isn't over," he spat. "You're right about that," Marcus agreed. "It's just beginning." When Sheriff Michael Davis arrived with 2 deputies, they found Marcus sitting calmly on the porch steps, Victor's gun unloaded and placed carefully beside him. Shadow sat at attention beside his master, alert but calm. Inside, they found Phillips writhing in pain, his arm mangled by Shadow's powerful jaws. Henderson was still unconscious in the back room, a growing lump on the base of his skull. Outside, there was no sign of Victor Reese. Despite his injuries, he had managed to disappear into the woods before the police arrived. Sheriff Davis was a tall, weathered man with the patient eyes of someone who had seen it all and wasn't easily impressed. He listened to Marcus's account with professional detachment, jotting notes in a small notebook. "So you're saying these men broke in and attacked you unprovoked?" Davis asked, skepticism evident in his tone. "That's exactly what I'm saying," Marcus replied. Ask Diana Collins. She'll tell you about Cameron Blackwood and his obsession with the lighthouse. At the mention of Blackwood, something changed in the sheriff's demeanor. A slight tightening around the eyes, a subtle shift in posture. Blackwood is a respected businessman, Mr. Reed. He employs a lot of people in this county. That's a serious accusation. Marcus met his gaze steadily. It's not an accusation, it's a fact. Check these men's backgrounds. I guarantee they're on Blackwood's payroll. The sheriff didn't respond immediately. He tucked his notebook away and adjusted his hat. We'll look into it. In the meantime, these two will be charged with breaking and entering, assault, and possession of illegal firearms. If you're right about their connection to Blackwood, we'll find it. After the sheriff and his deputies had departed with the two prisoners, Diana arrived with Dr. Winters. She rushed to Marcus, her face pale with concern. Are you all right? When I heard the gunshots, I'm fine, Marcus assured her. We both are. But Victor got away, and he'll be reporting back to Blackwood. Things are going to escalate now. Dr. Winters surveyed the damaged cottage, his expression grim. You need to get off this property, son, at least temporarily. Blackwood won't stop, and next time he'll send more men. I can't leave, Marcus said firmly. The summer solstice is in 3 days. That's when Thomas's puzzle can be solved, when the light in the chart and the lens all align. If I leave now, I might never get another chance. Diana and Dr. Thoreau. Winters exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. Then we'll stay with you, Diana said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Robert has a shotgun, and I'm a better shot than most of the men in this town. We'll help you finish what Thomas started. Marcus was about to protest when his satellite phone rang. The number was blocked. With a sense of foreboding, he answered. Mr. Reed, a cultured voice said, calm and controlled. This is Cameron Blackwood. I believe we have matters to discuss. Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. Your men just tried to kill me and my dog, Mr. Blackwood. I'm not feeling particularly conversational. A regrettable misunderstanding, Blackwood replied smoothly. Victor Reese exceeded his authority. He has been disciplined. I assure you my instructions were simply to secure certain items of historical significance that rightfully belong to my family. Marcus laughed, a short, harsh sound. That's not how I see it. Perhaps we could discuss our differing perspectives in person, Blackwood suggested. I'll be in Stormhaven tomorrow. The Harbor Crest Inn, noon. Come alone, and I promise you'll leave unharmed and significantly wealthier. I can be quite generous to those who help me recover my family's legacy. And if I refuse? There was a slight pause. Then I can't be responsible for what happens next. The property you're occupying has significant structural issues. It would be a shame if it were condemned as unsafe, forcing your immediate eviction. The local authorities are quite responsive to concerns about public safety. The threat was clear. Blackwood had influence over the sheriff and probably the town council as well. I'll consider it, Marcus said finally. Excellent. I look forward to meeting you, Mr. Reed. Blackwood ended the call. Marcus lowered the phone, his mind racing. This was an opportunity, a chance to look his enemy in the eye, to perhaps understand what drove him. But it was also dangerous. Blackwood wasn't a man who accepted defeat gracefully. Diana and Dr. Winters had heard enough of the conversation to understand. You can't go, Diana said immediately. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap, Marcus agreed. But it's also a chance to buy time. 3 days until the solstice. 3 days to finish Thomas's work. If I can keep Blackwood talking, keep him thinking I might cooperate, it gives us the time we need. Dr. Winters nodded slowly, seeing the logic. And while you're meeting with Blackwood, Diana and I can secure the lighthouse. We'll need supplies, tools to repair the damage, perhaps some additional security measures. Marcus looked at his unlikely allies, an elderly historian and a diner owner, and felt a surge of gratitude. For years he had operated alone, trusting no one but himself in shadow. Now suddenly he was part of something larger, a trio united by a common purpose. All right, he said, here's what we're going to do. The Harbor Crest Inn was the finest establishment in Stormhaven, a Victorian mansion converted into a boutique hotel overlooking the harbor. As Marcus climbed the wide steps to the veranda, he was acutely aware of his appearance. Jeans, work boots, and a simple button-down shirt against the backdrop of polished mahogany and crystal chandeliers. He had left Shadow with Diana, not wanting to risk the wagon in what might be a dangerous situation. Before leaving, he had given her clear instructions. If he didn't return or call by 2 p.m., she was to contact Dr. Winters and execute their backup plan. A hostess led him to a private dining room at the back of the inn. Cameron Blackwood sat alone at a table set for two, a bottle of wine already open and breathing beside him. He rose as Marcus entered, extending a hand in greeting. "Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. Please join me." Marcus ignored the offered hand, instead taking the seat across from Blackwood. This close, he could see the details he had missed in their previous distant encounter. The carefully manicured nails, the subtle scent of expensive cologne, the monogrammed cufflinks at his wrists. Everything about Cameron Blackwood spoke of wealth, power, and control. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Marcus said. "You want something from me. What is it?" Blackwood smiled, seemingly unfazed by the directness. "To the point. I appreciate that." "Very well. I understand you've found certain items that once belonged to Thomas Hammond. A journal, a compass, perhaps other artifacts related to his research on the horizon." Marcus didn't confirm or deny, his face a neutral mask. Blackwood continued, pouring wine into both glasses. "These items are of considerable personal interest to me, as you now know. My ancestor, Captain Edwards Blackwood, has been maligned by history for far too long. The story that he deliberately sabotaged his mission, that he was a traitor to the colonial cause, it's a stain that has followed my family for generations. And you think finding in the horizon will clear his name?" "I know it will," Blackwood said, his composure slipping for a moment, revealing a flash of intense emotion. "The treaty is still there, along with my ancestor's personal log. Together they'll prove he was attempting to fulfill his mission, not sabotage it. The hurricane was an act of guile, not an act of treason." Marcus took a sip of wine, buying time to consider his words. "And if I've found a way to locate the horizon, what then?" Blackwood leaned forward, his eyes suddenly alight with fervor. "Then I would make you a very wealthy man, Mr. Reed. $2 million for the journal and compass, another $3 million when the ship is found and the treaty recovered. $5 million total, tax-free, deposited in any account you designate." It was a staggering sum, more money than Marcus had ever imagined possessing. For a moment, he allowed himself to consider it. Financial security for life, the freedom to go anywhere, do anything. But then he thought of Thomas Hammond, the old lighthouse keeper who had protected this secret for decades. He thought of Shadow, who had nearly died defending their home. And he thought of the truth, a historical document that belonged not to any one person or family, but to the nation itself. "And if I refuse?" Marcus asked, already knowing the answer. Blackwood's expression hardened, the mask of civility slipping further. "I'm not accustomed to being refused, Mr. Reed. The lighthouse property has been rezoned for commercial development. The town council approved it this morning. You're now trespassing on land designated for a resort complex. You have 48 hours to vacate or face legal consequences." Marcus set down his glass carefully. "That's quite a coincidence, the rezoning happening right after your men failed to take what they wanted by force." Blackwood smiled thinly. "Coincidences happen all the time in small towns, Mr. Reed, especially towns that depend on the economic opportunities provided by men like me." Marcus stood, having heard enough. "You've made your position clear, Mr. Blackwood. Now let me make mine clear. The horizon doesn't belong to you or to me. It's a piece of American history. If and when it's found, it will be through proper archaeological channels, and any artifacts recovered will go to museums and archives where they belong." Blackwood's face flushed with anger. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. This isn't just about a shipwreck or an old piece of paper. This is about my family's honor. 7 generations of Blackwoods have lived under this shadow, and I will not be the one who fails to clear our name." "Maybe there's a reason the ship has remained hidden for all these years," Marcus suggested. "Maybe some truths are better left buried." Blackwood rose, his composure regained but his eyes cold. "You have 48 hours, Mr. Reed. After that, I cannot be responsible for what happens." As Marcus turned to leave, Blackwood added, "Oh, and Mr. Reed, that dog of yours, remarkable animal. It would be a shame if anything happened to him. Dogs can be so vulnerable to poison bait." Marcus stopped, his back to Blackwood, every muscle in his body tensing with the effort not to turn around and strike the man. After a moment of rigid self-control, he continued walking, letting the door close behind him without another word. The threat against Shadow had done what perhaps nothing else could have. It had made this personal. Cameron Blackwood had just made the worst mistake of his life. By the time Marcus returned to the lighthouse, Diana and Dr. Winters had already begun repairs on the damaged doors and windows. Shadow greeted him with enthusiastic relief, checking him over as if to ensure he had returned unharmed. Marcus shared the details of his meeting with Blackwood, including the rezoning threat and the 48-hour deadline. "He can't do that, can he?" Diana asked, her face creased with worry. "Just rezone the property overnight?" Dr. Winters sighed heavily. "With his money and influence?" "Yes, he can. The town council is filled with his allies. Most of them owe their positions to his support." "Then we have until the day after tomorrow," Marcus said firmly. "The summer solstice. If Thomas was right, that's when we can pinpoint the location of the horizon." "And then what?" Diana asked. "Even if we find it, we can't recover it ourselves. It would take a professional salvage operation, equipment, permits. One step at a time," Marcus said. "First we find it. Then we document everything. The journal, the compass, the chart, all of it. We create a record that can't be erased or altered. Then we go public. Local news, state news, national if we can get it. Once the story is out there, Blackwood can't just make it disappear." Dr. Winters nodded approvingly. "A sound strategy. The court of public opinion can be more powerful than any legal proceeding. But we'll need to be thorough, and we'll need proof." The next 36 hours passed in a flurry of activity. Marcus and Dr. Winters meticulously documented every page of Thomas Hammond's journal, photographing each entry, each diagram. Diana used her connections in town to quietly spread word of what was happening, cultivating potential allies in their fight against Blackwood's takeover. Marcus spent hours in the lantern room, cleaning the great Fresnel lens to a crystal-clear shine, positioning the star chart precisely on the floor, testing different angles with the small lens from the compass. Everything had to be perfect for the solstice alignment. As night fell on the eve of the solstice, they gathered in the keeper's cottage for a simple meal. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and apprehension. Tomorrow would bring either triumph or defeat. After dinner, as Diana and Dr. Winters sat discussing final preparations, Marcus stepped outside with Shadow for a moment of quiet reflection. The night was clear, the stars brilliant against the velvet black sky. The air carried the tang of salt and the distant rhythm of waves against rock. He found himself thinking of Thomas Hammond, the solitary keeper who had guarded this secret for so long. What had driven him? Was it just the thrill of the historical hunt, or something deeper? Shadow suddenly stiffened beside him, a low growl building in his chest. Marcus instantly went on alert, scanning the darkness. At first he saw nothing, then a flicker of movement at the edge of the property, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows of the trees. Victor Reese stepped into a patch of moonlight, his massive frame unmistakable, even at a distance. But he wasn't alone. Two other figures flanked him, and even in the dim light, Marcus could see the outline of weapons in their hands. They hadn't come to talk this time. They had come to take what they wanted by any means necessary. Marcus retreated silently into the cottage, closing the door behind him. Diana and Dr. Winters looked up, immediately sensing his tension. "Blackwood's men," Marcus said tersely. "At least 3 of them, armed. Victor's with them." Dr. Winters moved to the window, peering carefully through a gap in the curtains. "He's not wasting any time, is he? Not even waiting for his own deadline." "They won't hesitate to use force," Marcus warned. "Diana, take Shadow and go out the back. Get to your car and drive to town. Alert the sheriff." Diana shook her head firmly. "I'm not leaving you 2 here alone." "This isn't a discussion," Marcus said, his voice hard. "Shadow goes with you. He'll protect you if they try to stop you. The journal and the compass are in my backpack by the door. Take them. If anything happens to us, at least the truth will be safe." Dr. Winters placed a hand on Diana's shoulder. "He's right, my dear. We need a contingency plan. Someone has to survive to tell the story." Diana hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. She grabbed the backpack and whistled softly to Shadow. The dog looked to Marcus, torn between conflicting loyalties. "Go," Marcus commanded, pointing to Diana. "Protect." Shadow whined but obeyed, moving to Diana's side. She knelt and hugged the dog fiercely, then straightened to embrace Dr. Winters. "Be careful, old man," she whispered. "Always am, my dear." Then she turned to Marcus, and without warning, pulled him into a tight hug. "You better be alive when I get back," she said fiercely. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, surprised by the intensity of her concern. Diana and Shadow slipped out the back door, disappearing into the darkness. Marcus and Dr. Winters looked at each other, two soldiers preparing for battle. "I was in the Navy during Korea," Dr. Winters said conversationally, moving to his bag and withdrawing an ancient but well-maintained shotgun. "Saw my share of action. Never thought I'd be in a firefight at my age, though." "You don't have to do this," Marcus said. "You could still get out." Dr. Winters chambered a shell with a satisfying click. "Thomas Hammond was my friend for 40 years. I'll be damned if I let some corporate pig desecrate his legacy. Now where do you want me?" Marcus grinned despite the gravity of the situation. "Cover the front door. I'll take the back. They'll probably try to flank us." The two men took up their positions, Marcus with Victor's confiscated pistol, Dr. Winters with his shotgun. The minutes stretched into an eternity of tense waiting. Then it began. A window shattered as something was thrown through it, a small metal canister that immediately began spewing thick, acrid smoke. "Tear gas!" Marcus shouted, pulling his shirt up over his nose and mouth. "Stay low!" The cottage rapidly filled with the choking fumes. Marcus's eyes burned, tears streaming down his face. Through the smoke, he saw the back door burst open, a figure in a gas mask rushing in. Marcus fired twice. The figure staggered, but didn't fall. Body armor. Marcus adjusted his aim and fired again, hitting the intruder in the leg. The man went down with a muffled cry. From the front of the cottage came the thunderous report of Dr. Winters' shotgun, followed by a scream of pain. The old man might be in his 70s, but he could still shoot. "We need to get to the Lighthouse Tower," Marcus called through the smoke. "It's more defensible." He made his way to Dr. Winters, finding the old historian crouched by the front window, reloading his shotgun with practiced efficiency. "I got one of them," Winters reported calmly. "Took a load of buckshot in the chest. Not fatal with that body armor, but he won't be dancing for a while. Let's move," Marcus said. On three, they burst from the cottage, running for the tower door. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets chipping stone from the lighthouse wall. Marcus returned fire, providing covering fire as Dr. Winters reached the door and wrenched it open. A bullet grazed Marcus's arm as he dove through the doorway. Dr. Winters slammed the heavy oak door shut behind them and threw the bolt. "You're hit," the old man observed. "Just a scratch," Marcus replied, already starting up the spiral staircase. "Come on, we need to get to the lantern room." They climbed the winding stairs, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. At the top, they barricaded the door to the lantern room with an old cabinet. "Now what?" Dr. Winters asked. His breathing labored from the climb. "Now we wait," Marcus said grimly. Diana should have reached town by now. Help will be coming. But even as he said it, he knew it might not be enough. Blackwood's men were determined, well-equipped, and had the advantage of numbers. And the sheriff might not be inclined to rush to their aid, given his apparent connection to Blackwood. The minutes ticked by. Outside, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. Dawn was approaching. Dawn on the summer solstice. In just a few hours, the sun would reach the precise position necessary for Thomas Hammond's puzzle to be solved, if they lived that long. The sound of splintering wood from below indicated that the intruders had broken through the tower door. Heavy footsteps echoed on the stone stairs, growing louder as they approached. Dr. Winters positioned himself beside the door, shotgun ready. Marcus took up a position behind the great Fresnel lens, using it as cover. The barricaded door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. Once, twice, a third time. A third. The cabinet began to slide across the floor. "Get ready," Marcus said. With a final crash, the door burst open. Victor Reese stood in the doorway, a nasty smile on his face. He held a pistol in his good hand. "End of the line, Reed," he said. "Mr. Blackwood sends his regards." Dr. Winters fired, the shotgun blast deafening in the confined space. But Victor had been expecting it and ducked at the last moment. The buckshot tore into the doorframe, where his head had been a split second before. Victor's return shot was precise. Dr. Winters staggered back, a bloom of red spreading across his chest. He collapsed against the wall, sliding down to a sitting position, the shotgun clattering from his hands. "No," Marcus shouted. He fired at Victor, but the big man had already ducked behind the cover of the doorway. "It's over, Reed," Victor called. "Throw out your weapon, and maybe the old man lives long enough for an ambulance." Marcus glanced at Dr. Winters. The historian's face was ashen, his breathing shallow. The wound was serious, possibly fatal without immediate medical attention. "Don't give in," Winters gasped. "The secret? Protect it." Victor's voice came again. 5 seconds, Reed. Then I start shooting the old man again." Marcus's mind raced. There had to be a way out of this. He looked around the lantern room desperately, seeking inspiration. And then he saw it. The first rays of the solstice sun slanting through the eastern windows of the lantern room. The light struck the great Fresnel lens, creating a dazzling array of refracted beams. An idea formed, desperate, risky, but their only chance. "All right," Marcus called. "I'm coming out. Don't shoot." He carefully placed his gun on the floor and stood, hands raised. As he did so, he casually picked up the small lens from Thomas Hammond's compass, palming it so Victor couldn't see. Victor stepped into the doorway, gun trained on Marcus's chest. "Smart move, Reed. Now where's the journal?" "It's gone," Marcus said. "Diana Collins took it. She's probably giving it to the state police as we speak." Victor's face darkened with anger. "You're lying, am I?" Marcus took a step to the side, positioning himself so that the sun's rays through the Fresnel lens were at his back. "Check for yourself, the journal's not here." Victor hesitated, then motioned with his gun for one of his men to search the room. As the man moved past him, Marcus made his move. He threw the small lens from the compass directly into the path of the sun's rays, passing through the Fresnel lens. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The concentrated beam of light, already intense, was focused to laser-like precision by the second lens. It shot across the room in a blinding flash, striking Victor directly in the eyes. The big man screamed, dropping his gun and clutching at his face. Marcus was already moving. He grabbed the fallen shotgun and swung it like a baseball bat, connecting with the second intruder's head with a sickening crack. Then he turned to Victor, who was still staggering blindly, cursing in pain. "It's over, Victor," Marcus said, leveling the shotgun at him. "On your knees, hands behind your head." Victor froze, then slowly complied, sinking to his knees. "You've just signed your death warrant, Reed," he snarled. "When Mr. Blackwood hears about this—" Whatever Victor was about to say was cut off by a new voice from the doorway. "When Mr. Blackwood hears about this, he'll be disappointed in your failure. Again." Marcus turned, keeping the shotgun trained on Victor. Cameron Blackwood stood in the doorway, immaculate in a tailored suit despite the early hour. Behind him stood 2 more men, both armed. "My apologies for the dramatic entrance, Mr. Reed," Blackwood said smoothly. "But I found that if you want something done right, you really must do it yourself." The lantern room fell silent, save for the labored breathing of Dr. Winters and the soft groan of Victor Reese, still blinded by the flash of light. Cameron Blackwood's arrival had transformed the dynamic instantly, a chess master stepping onto the board after watching his pawns fail. "Mr. Reed," Blackwood said, his voice as smooth and cold as polished marble, "I truly regret that matters have escalated to this point. Violence was never my intention. It seems my employees have been overzealous in their approach." Marcus kept the shotgun steady, his eyes never leaving Blackwood's face. "Overzealous? Your men nearly killed us." Blackwood stepped further into the room, careful to keep his hands visible. His 2 guards remained in the doorway, weapons lowered but ready. "An unfortunate misinterpretation of my instructions. I simply wanted the journal and compass secured. The shots fired were not authorized." Dr. Winters coughed, a wet, troubling sound. Blood seeped through his fingers where he pressed them against his chest wound. "Lies. All of it. Lies." Blackwood's gaze shifted to the injured historian, a flicker of genuine concern crossing his features. "Your friend needs medical attention, Mr. Reed. My helicopter is standing by. We can have him at Portland General within 30 minutes. All I ask in return is a moment of your time." Marcus hesitated. He knew it was a manipulation, but Dr. Winters was dying. Every second counted. "And your men?" Marcus asked, nodding toward Victor and the unconscious thug on the floor. They failed me. They're no longer my concern. The coldness with which Blackwood dismissed his own men sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Here was a man who valued loyalty only when it served his purposes. Fine, Marcus said finally. Call your helicopter. But your men stay here, and your guards drop their weapons. Blackwood nodded to his men, who carefully placed their guns on the floor. Then he pulled out a phone and spoke briefly, ordering the helicopter to land immediately. When he ended the call, he turned back to Marcus. Now perhaps we can speak like civilized men. I believe we both want the same thing, to discover the truth about the horizon and my ancestor. Marcus shook his head. I doubt that very much. Dr. Winters was fading fast, his face ashen, his breathing increasingly shallow. Marcus knelt beside him, keeping one eye on Blackwood and his men. Hold on, Robert, he whispered. Help is coming. The old man's eyes flickered open, surprisingly clear and focused. The solstice, the light, you must complete Thomas's work. I will, Marcus promised. I'll finish it. A faint smile touched Dr. Winters' lips. He fumbled weakly at his shirt pocket, finally extracting a folded piece of paper. He pressed it into Marcus's hand. Thomas gave me this years ago, said to keep it safe until the right person came along. I think that's you. Marcus took the paper and slipped it into his pocket, not daring to examine it with Blackwood watching. From outside came the growing whump, whump, whump of helicopter rotors approaching. You should know, Mr. Reed, Blackwood said, his voice pitched just loud enough to be heard over the helicopter noise, that I've obtained a court order for immediate possession of this property. State marshals are on their way as we speak. This lighthouse and everything in it now legally belongs to Blackwood Development Corporation. The helicopter landed on the small patch of flat ground beside the lighthouse. Two men in paramedic uniforms rushed in with a stretcher. They worked quickly and efficiently, stabilizing Dr. Winters as best they could before carefully moving him onto the stretcher. As they carried him out, he grasped Marcus's arm with surprising strength. Don't let him win, he whispered. The truth deserves to be free. Then he was gone, whisked away to the waiting helicopter. Marcus watched as it lifted off, banking sharply over the sea before heading inland toward Portland. Now, Blackwood said, as if they were simply continuing a pleasant conversation, let's discuss the horizon. Before Marcus could respond, the sound of a vehicle approaching at high speed drew their attention. A moment later, Diana's voice called up from below. Marcus, are you all right? He's fine, Miss Collins, Blackwood called back, a hint of amusement in his voice. Please join us. This concerns you as well. There was a pause, then the sound of footsteps on the spiral staircase. Diana appeared in the doorway, Shadow at her side. The dog growled low in his throat at the sight of Victor and the other intruders, but stayed obediently at Diana's heel. Diana took in the scene with a quick glance, the blood-stained floor where Dr. Winters had lain, the discarded weapons, the tension in Marcus's posture. Where's Robert? She demanded. He's been shot, Marcus answered. Blackwood's men. His helicopter took him to Portland General. Diana's face paled, but her voice remained steady. Is he? He's alive, but it's serious. Shadow padded silently to Marcus's side, pressing against his leg in a gesture of solidarity. The dog's eyes never left Blackwood, as if he understood exactly who was responsible for the danger. Blackwood cleared his throat. As touching as this reunion is, time is of the essence. The summer solstice waits for no man, and I believe we all have an interest in what happens when the sun reaches its zenith today. Diana's eyes widened slightly. You know about the solstice alignment? Blackwood smiled thinly. Thomas Hammond wasn't the only one studying the horizon, Miss Collins. My family has been searching for that ship for 7 generations. Did you think I wouldn't notice the pattern in Hammond's research? The obsession with astronomical calculations? The repeated references to the summer solstice in his notes? Marcus and Diana exchanged glances. If Blackwood knew this much, what else had he deduced? What exactly do you want? Marcus asked bluntly. Blackwood spread his hands in a gesture of apparent openness. A partnership. You have pieces of the puzzle I lack. The journal, the compass, the star chart. I have resources you need. Legal standing to excavate the wreck. The financial means to mount a proper salvage operation. The political connections to cut through red tape. Together, we can recover the horizon and reveal the truth about my ancestors' final voyage. And the treaty? Diana asked. What happens to that? A flicker of something, cunning perhaps, or calculation passed across Blackwood's face. It will be properly preserved and studied, of course. Its historical significance is immeasurable. Marcus didn't believe him for a second. You mean you'll keep it private, examine it to be sure it exonerates your ancestor, and then decide whether the public ever sees it? Blackwood's expression hardened. My ancestor was not a traitor, Mr. Reed. The treaty will prove that. But the Blackwood name has suffered enough public humiliation over the centuries. I reserve the right to control how and when the truth is revealed. The truth isn't yours to control, Diana said fiercely. History belongs to everyone. A tense silence fell over the lantern room. Outside, the sun continued its ascent toward its solstice zenith. They had perhaps an hour before the critical alignment would occur, the moment when Thomas Hammond's ingenious puzzle would reveal the location of the horizon. Blackwood broke the silence. I had hoped for cooperation, but I'm prepared for resistance. As I mentioned, state marshals are en route with a court order. This property is now legally mine. The journal, compass, and chart are Blackwood family artifacts, wrongfully withheld by Thomas Hammond. One way or another, I will recover what belongs to me. Marcus felt a surge of anger. You manipulated the legal system, bought off judges and officials. Blackwood's smile was cold. Prove it. Before Marcus could respond, Diana stepped forward, her expression resolute. If you're so confident in your legal position, Mr. Blackwood, why the armed men? Why the break-in? Why is Dr. Winters fighting for his life with a bullet in his chest? A flicker of discomfort crossed Blackwood's face. As I said, my employees exceeded their authority. Diana wasn't backing down. And I suppose they also exceeded their authority when they threatened to poison Shadow. Or when they told Marcus he had 48 hours to vacate the lighthouse before something unfortunate happened. Blackwood's composure slipped further. The tone of negotiations can sometimes become heated. This isn't a negotiation, Marcus said, his voice steady. It's an ultimatum. But you've overlooked something important. And what's that? Blackwood asked, his tone dismissive. Thomas Hammond chose this place for a reason. The lighthouse isn't just a landmark or a piece of real estate. It's an instrument, a precisely calibrated tool designed to reveal the location of the horizon, but only under specific conditions, only at a specific moment. Marcus gestured to the great Fresnel lens at the center of the room. This lens, this room, the exact position of this tower on this specific point of land, they're all part of the puzzle. Thomas knew that even if someone found his journal and chart, they'd need the lighthouse itself to solve the final riddle. Blackwood's expression changed as the implications sank in. The solstice alignment won't work anywhere else. Marcus nodded. Exactly. So here's my counteroffer. We work together just for today. We use the alignment to pinpoint the horizon's location. Then we bring in independent experts, maritime archaeologists, historians, government officials. The recovery is done properly, scientifically, with full public disclosure. And what does the illustrious Marcus Reed get out of this arrangement? Blackwood asked, skepticism evident in his tone. Credit for the discovery and legal ownership of this lighthouse, which you will deed back to me as part of our agreement. Diana looked at Marcus in surprise. He hadn't discussed this with her, but she could see the strategy. The lighthouse was now Marcus's home, perhaps the first real home he'd had since leaving the military. He wasn't going to give it up without a fight. Blackwood considered the proposal, his shrewd mind clearly calculating the angles, the risks, the potential benefits, and pitfalls. I need assurances, he said finally. Guarantees that my family's interests will be protected. You'll have a seat at the table during the recovery and research, Marcus conceded. Equal access to all findings. Public acknowledgement of the Blackwood family's role in locating the shipwreck. But no exclusive rights, no private ownership of historical artifacts, and no control over the narrative. Blackwood's jaw tightened. You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Reed. Take it or leave it. But remember, without us, without this lighthouse, you'll never find the horizon. 7 generations of Blackwoods have failed. Do you want to be the 8th? The question hung in the air between them, a challenge that struck at the heart of Blackwood's deepest motivations. For all his wealth and power, he was still driven by the need to redeem his family name, to correct a historical injustice that had shadowed the Blackwoods for centuries. Very well, Blackwood said at last. A temporary truce. We'll use the solstice alignment together. After that, we'll see. He extended his hand. Marcus hesitated, then shook it firmly. Now, Blackwood said, gesturing to the unconscious man on the floor and Victor, who was still nursing his temporarily blinded eyes, get this trash out of here. We have work to do. His two guards moved quickly, helping Victor to his feet and dragging the unconscious man toward the stairs. Mr. Reese, Blackwood called as Victor was being led away, consider your employment terminated. Your severance package will reflect your performance. Victor's face contorted with rage and betrayal, but he said nothing as he was led down the spiral staircase. When they were gone, Marcus turned to Diana. Let's get ready. We don't have much time. They worked quickly, positioning the star chart on the floor beneath the great Fresnel lens. Marcus carefully cleaned the lens from the compass, examining it in the strengthening morning light. Diana watched him, her expression troubled. Do you trust him? She whispered, nodding toward Blackwood, who was standing by the window, gazing out at the ocean. Not for a second, Marcus replied quietly. But we need to buy time, and I want to see what Dr. Winters gave me. He slipped the folded paper from his pocket, carefully shielding it from Blackwood's view. It was a letter written in Thomas Hammond's meticulous handwriting. To whoever solves my puzzle, it began. If you're reading this, Robert has judged you worthy of the trust I've placed in him. The Horizon's secret is a double-edged sword. It can heal old wounds or inflict new ones, depending on whose hands wield it. The true location is not what the alignment will show you today. It will point to a decoy, a false wreck I created to mislead those whose intentions are impure. The real horizon lies 2 nautical miles northwest of the false position. Only you and Robert know this now. Choose wisely who else learns the truth. Thomas Hammond. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Thomas had been more cunning than anyone realized. He had created a false trail, a decoy to protect the real secret. He quickly refolded the note and tucked it away, catching Diana's eye and giving a slight shake of his head. Later, his expression said, the sun continued its climb toward zenith. Blackwood returned from the window, his impatience barely contained. How much longer? Minutes now, Marcus replied, making a show of checking the position of the sun. The alignment will only last for a few moments. We need to be ready. He positioned the small lens from the compass at precisely the right angle to the Fresnel lens, creating a focused beam of light that would strike the star chart when the sun reached the exact position Thomas Hammond had calculated. As they waited for the critical moment, Diana moved closer to Marcus. What did Robert's note say? She whispered. Not now, Marcus murmured. Keep Shadow close. We may need to move quickly. The air in the lantern room grew tense with anticipation. Blackwood checked his watch repeatedly, pacing the small, circular space like a caged predator. Shadow sat alert at Diana's feet, his amber eyes tracking Blackwood's every move. Then, without warning, a brilliant beam of light shot through the Fresnel lens, catching the small compass lens and refracting into a precise pattern that illuminated the star chart on the floor. The effect was magical. The stars on the chart seemed to glow with an inner fire, transforming the abstract drawing into what was clearly a detailed map of the seabed. And there, at the exact center of the pattern, a small X was revealed, a location previously invisible, marked by the intersection of light and shadow. Blackwood inhaled sharply. There it is, the horizon. Marcus knelt beside the chart, making a show of carefully marking the coordinates revealed by the light pattern. He knew they were false, but Blackwood didn't need to know that yet. As the sun moved past the critical alignment point, the light pattern faded, returning the star chart to its ordinary appearance. The moment of revelation had passed. Blackwood was practically vibrating with excitement. After all these years, all the searching, all the dead ends, we've found it. Marcus stood, folding the chart carefully. Yes, we have. And now we honor our agreement. Independent experts, proper archaeological protocols, full public disclosure. Blackwood's expression faltered slightly. Of course, but first, I'd like my team to verify the coordinates. A simple precaution. Marcus was about to respond when the sound of heavy footsteps on the spiral staircase caught everyone's attention. A moment later, Sheriff Davis appeared in the doorway, accompanied by two deputies. "Marcus Reed," the sheriff said, his expression grim. "I have a court order authorizing the immediate eviction of all unauthorized personnel from this property." He held up an official-looking document. The lighthouse and surrounding land now legally belong to Blackwood Development Corporation. Behind the sheriff, Victor Reese appeared, a malicious smile on his face despite his still reddened eyes. "Looks like your partnership just expired, Reed," he sneered. Blackwood looked genuinely surprised. "Sheriff, this is unnecessary. Mr. Reed and I have come to an understanding." The sheriff hesitated, glancing between Blackwood and Victor. "But I have the court order right here, sir. Mr. Reese said you wanted it executed immediately." Marcus realized what had happened. Victor, furious at being dismissed by Blackwood, had taken matters into his own hands. He was using the sheriff to exact his revenge, disrupting the fragile truce before Blackwood could stop him. Blackwood's face darkened with anger. "This is premature, Sheriff. I'll handle this matter personally." But the sheriff had already noticed the blood on the floor, the discarded weapons, the signs of the earlier struggle. "What happened here?" he demanded, his hand moving to his service weapon. Marcus and Diana exchanged glances. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Sheriff," Diana said, stepping forward, "Dr. Robert Winters was shot here this morning by men working for Mr. Blackwood. He's been airlifted to Portland General. This was an armed assault, not a real estate dispute." "That's a lie," Victor snarled. "Reed attacked us. We were just defending ourselves." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Marcus. "Is this true?" Before Marcus could answer, Shadow suddenly lunged forward, placing himself between Marcus and the sheriff, a low, warning growl rumbling in his chest. The sheriff's deputies instantly drew their weapons. "Call off your dialogue, Reed," one of them ordered. The tension in the room was approaching the breaking point. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, and bullets would fly. But then, in the midst of the standoff, a new voice called up from below. "Sheriff Davis, this is Agent Reynolds, FBI. We're coming up." Everyone froze. A moment later, a man in a dark suit appeared in the doorway, flanked by two more agents. He held up a badge. "Special Agent James Reynolds, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We're here to secure evidence related to a federal investigation into historical antiquities, trafficking, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The sheriff looked stunned. "I wasn't notified of any federal investigation." Agent Reynolds' expression was professionally neutral. "This operation has been classified, Sheriff. We've been monitoring communications between Cameron Blackwood and several international black market antiquities dealers. We have reason to believe he planned to recover artifacts from the shipwreck horizon and sell them privately overseas, in violation of numerous federal statutes." Blackwood's face went ashen. "This is preposterous. I've broken no laws." The FBI agent turned to him. "Mr. Blackwood, we have recordings of your conversations with a dealer in Amsterdam discussing the sale of, and I quote, a document of significant historical value to American history. Care to explain that?" As Blackwood sputtered denials, Marcus caught a glimpse of a familiar figure behind the FBI agents. Dr. Robert Winters, pale but very much alive, sitting in a wheelchair. "Robert," Diana exclaimed, "but how?" The old historian smiled weakly. "Did you really think I'd miss the grand finale? The helicopter took me to the FBI field office in Portland, not the hospital. I've been working with them for months, building a case against Blackwood." Marcus stared in amazement. "You were never shot?" "Oh, I was shot all right," Winters grimaced, touching his chest, "but I was wearing a ballistic vest. Still hurts like hell, though. Broke 2 ribs when the bullet hit." Agent Reynolds stepped forward. "Mr. Reed, Ms. Collins, we owe you a debt of gratitude. Your involvement has finally given us the evidence we needed to move against Mr. Blackwood." Sheriff Davis looked from the FBI agents to Blackwood, clearly reassessing his position. The businessman he had thought untouchable was suddenly very vulnerable indeed. "I assume you'll be handling the arrests, Agent?" the sheriff asked, holstering his weapon. Reynolds nodded. "Cameron Blackwood, Victor Reese, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted murder, assault with deadly weapons, and trafficking in protected historical artifacts." As the FBI agents began reading Blackwood and Victor their rights, Blackwood fixed Marcus with a venomous glare. "This isn't over, Reed. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Actually, Marcus replied calmly, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A man so obsessed with clearing his ancestors' name that he became exactly what he despised, a traitor to history itself. As Blackwood and Victor were led away in handcuffs, Dr. R. Winters wheeled himself further into the room. Well done, both of you. Thomas would be proud. Diana knelt beside his wheelchair, hugging him gently to avoid his injured ribs. You old fraud, I thought you were dying. Winters chuckled, then winced at the pain. Just good acting, my dear. Though the blood was real enough, a packet hidden under my shirt, an old theatrical trick. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. You've been working with the FBI all along? Winters nodded. Thomas suspected Blackwood's true intentions years ago. He believed Blackwood meant to find the treaty and destroy it if it confirmed his ancestors' treachery. I reached out to the FBI after Thomas died, shared our suspicions. They've been building a case ever since, but they needed proof of Blackwood's intentions. And the note, Marcus asked, about the true location? Ah, that, Winters smiled. Pure Thomas Hammond, he always had a backup plan. Agent Reynolds approached them. Mr. Reed, I understand you have the actual coordinates for the Horizon's location? Marcus hesitated, looking at Diana and Dr. Winters. The real coordinates, 2 miles northwest of what the alignment showed, were known only to the three of them. Dr. Winters nodded encouragingly. It's time, Marcus. The truth deserves to be free. Marcus pulled out the star chart and explained the deception Thomas Hammond had built into his puzzle. Agent Reynolds listened attentively, then nodded. We'll arrange for a proper archaeological expedition with full academic oversight. The Horizon and everything it contains will be recovered according to scientific protocols and preserved for the historical record. And the lighthouse, Diana asked? What happens to it now? Reynolds smiled. The court order Blackwood obtained was based on fraudulent claims. It's already been vacated. The lighthouse remains the property of Thomas Hammond's estate, which, according to his will, passes to whoever solved his puzzle and protected its secret. He held out a folder to Marcus. Congratulations, Mr. Reed. You're now the legal owner of Stormwatch Point Lighthouse. Marcus took the folder, stunned by the turn of events. This was more than he had ever expected. A home, a purpose, a legacy to protect. 3 months later, a small group gathered on the cliff beside the lighthouse to watch as a research vessel anchored offshore prepared to raise the first artifacts from the horizon. The ship had been found exactly where Thomas Hammond's secret note had indicated, preserved in remarkable condition by the cold, deep waters off the Maine coast. Marcus stood with Diana, shadow at their feet, as Dr. Winters, now fully recovered from his injuries, explained the recovery process to a cluster of reporters and photographers. The story had captured national attention, a Revolutionary-era shipwreck, a secret treaty that might have changed American history, a centuries-old family disgrace, and a modern-day conspiracy to suppress historical truth. The FBI investigation had revealed the full extent of Cameron Blackwood's plans. He had indeed intended to recover the treaty privately and destroy it if it confirmed his ancestors' treachery. Searches of his private papers had uncovered a decades-long obsession with redeeming the Blackwood name, regardless of historical fact. He now faced years in federal prison, his empire crumbling as investigations uncovered a pattern of corruption, bribery, and fraud stretching back decades. Victor Reese had turned state's evidence, hoping for leniency in exchange for testifying against his former employer. His revelations about Blackwood's methods had implicated several local officials, including Sheriff Davis, who was now facing charges of his own. As the first artifacts from the horizon were carefully raised to the surface, a ship's bell, still intact after centuries underwater, a cheer went up from the assembled crowd. Dr. Winters rolled his wheelchair closer to the cliff edge for a better view. Thomas would have loved this, he said, his voice thick with emotion. His life's work, finally complete. Diana slipped her hand into Marcus's, a gesture that had become natural over the past months, as their relationship had deepened from allies to friends to something more. Do you think they'll find the treaty? She asked. Marcus squeezed her hand. If it's there, they'll find it. And whatever it says, whatever truth it reveals about Captain Edwards Blackwood and his final voyage, that truth will finally be known. Shadow pressed against Marcus's leg, a solid, reassuring presence. The dog had been through as much as any of them, fighting to protect his human and the secrets of the lighthouse. Now he watched the activity offshore with curious eyes, as if he understood the significance of what was happening. Later that evening, as the sun set over the Atlantic, Marcus stood in the lantern room, the great Fresnel lens once again shining out to sea. He had restored the lighthouse to its original purpose, a beacon of safety, a light in the darkness guiding travelers home. But it was more than that now. It was a guardian of history, a keeper of truth. Thomas Hammond had understood that some secrets needed protection until the right person came along, someone who would value truth over profit, history over personal gain. Diana joined him, bringing 2 mugs of coffee. The Historical Society meeting went well, she reported. They've approved the funding for the Maritime Museum in the Keeper's Cottage. We can start the renovations next month. Marcus smiled. Thomas would approve. She leaned against him, watching as the beam from the lighthouse swept across the darkening waters. You know, she said thoughtfully, for a man who came here seeking solitude, you've managed to become quite central to this community. It was true. In the months since the confrontation with Blackwood, Marcus had found himself increasingly involved in the life of Stormhaven. The lighthouse had become a focal point for local pride, and he its custodian. School groups visited to learn about maritime history. Tourists came to hear the story of the horizon. And through it all, Marcus had discovered something he hadn't expected to find when he first drove up that winding coastal road: a sense of belonging. I came looking for peace, he acknowledged, but I found something better: a purpose. Shadow padded over and settled at their feet, his job as guardian never quite finished. Outside, the rhythmic flash of the lighthouse beam marked the passage of time, just as it had for generations of keepers before. In the distance, the research vessel's lights twinkled on the horizon, continuing its work of recovering a lost piece of American history. Whatever truths the horizon would reveal in the coming days and weeks, they would finally be known. Not hidden, not suppressed, not manipulated to serve one family's need for redemption. The next morning, a call came from the recovery team. They had found something extraordinary: a sealed metal box, still intact after more than 2 centuries underwater. It had been discovered in what remained of the captain's cabin, protected by layers of silt and debris that had preserved it from the ravages of time and tide. Marcus, Diana, and Dr. Winters gathered at the small marine archaeology lab that had been set up in Stormhaven for the duration of the recovery operation. The box sat on a table, surrounded by careful technicians in white gloves. It was small, about the size of a modern cigar box, but made of heavy brass with intricate engravings on its surface. Dr. Winters leaned forward in his wheelchair, his eyes bright with anticipation. "That's the Blackwood family crest," he said, pointing to the design on the lid. This was definitely Captain Edwards Blackwood's personal property. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Sarah Chen, approached the box with reverent caution. "We've X-rayed it," she explained. "There appears to be a bundle of papers inside, remarkably well preserved thanks to the airtight seal. We're ready to open it now, if you'd like to witness the process." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of history pressing down upon them all. This moment had been centuries in the making. With painstaking care, Dr. Chen applied a specialized tool to break the seal without damaging the box. A small hiss of escaping air, the first breath from the 18th century released into the modern world, and then the lid was carefully lifted. Inside, just as the X-rays had shown, was a bundle of papers wrapped in oilcloth. Dr. Chen gently removed them and began the delicate process of unwrapping the protective covering. The first document revealed was written in a firm, elegant hand on heavy parchment. It bore the official seal of the British Crown, and its heading read, "Treaty of Reconciliation and Mutual Governance between His Majesty's Government and the American Colonies." "This is it," Dr. Winters breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "The secret treaty." As Dr. Chen carefully separated the pages, they saw the full scope of what Captain Blackwood had been carrying: a comprehensive agreement that would have granted the colonies near-complete autonomy while maintaining symbolic ties to Britain. It would have ended taxation without representation, guaranteed colonial rights to self-governance, and established a framework for peaceful cooperation that might have prevented the Revolutionary War entirely. But there was more. Beneath the treaty was a smaller, leather-bound book, Captain Edwards Blackwood's personal log. With trembling hands, Dr. Chen opened it to the final entries. June 14, 1765. We have encountered fierce headwinds off the coast of Maine. The treaty secured in my cabin is perhaps the most important document I have ever carried. Lord Barrington assures me it will prevent bloodshed and preserve the future of both Britain and her colonies. I pray we reach Boston soon. June 15, 1765. Storm warnings. The barometer falls steadily. I have ordered all unnecessary weight jettisoned and the ship battened down. The coast is treacherous here, and I fear what morning may bring. June 16, 1765. God help us all. The hurricane is upon us. We are being driven toward the rocks. I have sealed this log with the treaty in my strongbox, in hopes that if we perish, these documents might someday be recovered. Let it be known that I, Captain Edwards Blackwood, remain true to my mission until the end. The hurricane, not treachery, has been our undoing. May God have mercy on our souls. The room fell silent as the final words were read. There it was, the truth that 7 generations of Blackwoods had sought. Captain Edwards Blackwood had not been a traitor. He had been a dutiful captain, caught in a storm beyond his control, faithful to his mission until his dying breath. Diana's eyes glistened with tears. A family disgraced for nothing. A captain villainized by history for a crime he never committed. In a document that might have changed the course of American history, Dr. Winters added softly, if this treaty had reached the colonies, there might never have been a Revolutionary War. The United States as we know it might never have existed. Marcus shook his head, overwhelmed by the weight of the revelation. So much pain, so much history, turning on the vagaries of weather and fate. The news of the discovery spread rapidly. Historical societies and academic institutions around the world clamored for access to the documents. The Smithsonian and the National Archives became involved, negotiating for permanent preservation and display rights. The treaty and the captain's log eventually found their home in a special exhibition that traveled the country, allowing Americans everywhere to contemplate a pivotal moment in their history, a path not taken, a future that might have been. Cameron Blackwood, from his prison cell, received the news of his ancestors' vindication with bitter irony. The truth he had sought for so long had finally come to light, but he would not be the one to reveal it. His methods, his obsession, had cost him everything: his freedom, his fortune, his legacy. In a final twist that Thomas Hammond might have appreciated, the Blackwood family name was indeed redeemed. Not through Cameron's ruthless pursuit, but through Marcus Reed's commitment to historical truth and integrity. 6 months after the discovery, the keeper's cottage had been transformed into a small but popular maritime museum. It featured exhibits on the history of Stormwatch Point Lighthouse, Thomas Hammond's remarkable detective work, and of course the Horizon and its world-changing cargo. Diana had taken on the role of museum director, bringing her warmth and storytelling gifts to the history she now helped preserve. Dr. Winters served as historical consultant, his academic reputation burnished by his role in the discovery. He had completed his long-awaited book on New England maritime history with a special section devoted to the Horizon. As for Marcus, he had found a peace he never expected. The lighthouse was now his home in every sense of the word. He maintained the tower and the light, continuing the tradition of the keepers who had come before him. Each night he climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room and lit the great Fresnel lens, sending its beam out over the dark waters. Shadow had adapted well to his new role as unofficial museum mascot. Children who came to visit were enchanted by the heroic dog whose keen senses had helped uncover a historical treasure. He bore their attention with dignified patience, always returning to Marcus's side when the day's visitors had gone. On a crisp autumn evening, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Marcus and Diana sat on the porch of the keeper's cottage, watching the waves roll in. Shadow lay at their feet, content in the knowledge that his territory was secure and his humans were safe. "You know what I've been thinking?" Diana said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Thomas Hammond didn't just leave a puzzle about the horizon. He left a test of character." Marcus looked at her questioningly. "Think about it," she continued. "The journal, the compass, the star chart, they were all parts of a puzzle, yes, but they were also challenges to see if the finder had the patience, the intelligence, and the integrity to use them properly." "I never thought of it that way," Marcus admitted. "But you're right. He could have just written down the coordinates, and seal them away. Instead, he created an elaborate mechanism that could only be solved by someone willing to put in the time and effort to understand his work. And someone who would do the right thing with the knowledge, Diana added. He must have worried that the wrong person would find his research. Someone who would exploit the horizon for personal gain. Someone like Blackwood, Marcus nodded. Diana smiled, taking his hand. Instead, the lighthouse found you, a man who understood the value of truth, who was willing to fight for it. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. He couldn't deny the rightness of her words. The lighthouse had found him just as he had found it. Two solitary sentinels, standing against the elements, guardians of something greater than themselves. That night, as he stood in the lantern room, watching the great beam sweep across the darkness, Marcus thought about the chain of events that had brought him here. He had come seeking solitude, a place to nurse his wounds and find some measure of peace. Instead, he had found purpose, community, even love. And he had found a truth buried beneath 2 centuries of rumor and speculation. A captain unfairly maligned, a mission tragically unfulfilled, a document that might have changed the course of history. The sea does not give up its dead, Thomas Hammond had written, but it sometimes whispers its secrets to those who know how to listen. Marcus Reed had listened. And in the listening, he had found not just the secret of a centuries-old shipwreck, but something far more valuable. A home, a future, and a legacy worth protecting. The lighthouse stood as it had for over a century, unbowed and unbroken. And now, at last, its light shone true. In the months and years that followed, the story of the horizon and its secret treaty became a cornerstone of American historical discourse. Academics debated the what-ifs. What if the treaty had reached the colonies? What if the Revolutionary War had never happened? What if America had remained part of the British Empire, albeit with unprecedented autonomy? These questions had no definitive answers, but they sparked a renewed interest in the complex origins of the nation, the contingent nature of historical events, and the profound impact of individual actions and accidents on the course of human affairs. For Marcus Reed, these grand historical questions remained interesting but abstract. His focus was on the lighthouse, on Shadow, on Diana, and on the community of Stormhaven that had accepted him as one of their own. He had found his place in the world, not in the chaos of war, not in the isolation of trauma, but in the quiet purpose of being a keeper of light and truth. And every night, as he climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room, as he polished the great Fresnel lens and lit the lamp that would guide ships safely home, he felt the presence of those who had come before him, Thomas Hammond, and all the keepers stretching back through the decades. Like them, he was now part of something larger than himself, a chain of guardians stretching into both past and future. The lighthouse stood as it always had, a beacon in the darkness, and now Marcus Reed stood with it, keeper of its light, protector of its legacy, guardian of its truths. The sea might not give up its dead, but it had given him something far more precious. A second chance, a new beginning, a place to call home.